1954. It's about time that I returned. It's been 4 months, I know, and no updates barely, besides a one video. But I just needed a rest. I mean, lots of things were happening, and now that I feel rested and it's the ideal time, I just want to jump into this again. So, finally, after 4 months of inactivity, let's go. In first place, we have When Magoo Flew, starring, of course, the nearsighted Mr. Magoo. He had established himself as a star character of United Productions of America, and this might just be his best short. Mr. Magoo mistakes a plane for a movie theater, and he winds up wandering around in it while it's in mid-flight. Along the way, he foils a bad person. This was written by Ted Pierce of UPA fame. Ted Pierce of Warner Brothers fame, and directed by Pete Burness. Both of these men had experiences at Warner Brothers, and though Pete Burness had moved on from Warner Brothers, Pierce was merely writing in just to pass the time while the shutdown was happening, the temporary shutdown I discussed for the previous year. And Sid Marcus of Columbia fame took his place during that time as the writer of Robert McKimson's unit. But aside from the great writing and jokes, including the ending punchline about Mr. Magoo basically describing his own short series, this is typical Mr. Magoo stuff, albeit technically impressive Mr. Magoo stuff. But let's go on to second place. Crazy Mixed Up Pup, the triumphant return of Walter Lantz, and director Tex Avery, who also wrote. Avery started his career at Lantz before he went to Warner Brothers and MGM. And after leaving MGM in 1953, Avery decided to go back to Lantz. Which should be easy since A, he had history with Walter Lantz because, again, that's where he started his career, and B, because Lantz had promised him a huge paycheck. And of course, since Avery was one of the best directors out there, and he had started his career at Walter Lantz, once again, everything should have been smooth. In Crazy Mixed Up Pup, he introduced the world to Maggie and Sam, a stereotypical 50s couple who got into very unstereotypical adventures. Here, Sam and his dog are run over by a car, and the doctors, being very goofy, switch plasmas, so Sam begins acting like a dog, and the dog begins acting like a human. Maggie is eventually driven to move out of the house because she can't stand this mix-up until she herself winds up suffering the same fate. So, yeah. Another thing I forgot to note is that Walter Lantz had actually scored a further Academy Award in 1948. Not for a short, mind you, but for a music piece. The Woody Woodpecker song was introduced in 1947 and wound up becoming such an unexpected hit that in 1948, when Blanket Policy, Walter Lantz decided to put in the tune haphazardly, and this caused the short to actually get nominated for an Academy Award for Best Music, the only animated piece to ever have achieved this. Talk about award category fraud, huh? Well, Walter Lantz was kind of out of his golden age. Dick Lundy brought much needed talent to the studio, but Walter Lantz wanting higher budget to fit on these needs, switched distributors over from Universal to United Artists. The cartoons released through them were successes, and this deal ultimately went on for a grand total of 2 years. As luck would have it, around the time that Walter Lantz decided to have United Artists do the cartoons distribution, the Paramount case hit. And United Artists ultimately couldn't afford the budget to distribute these films, even with their higher budgets. So, Walter Lantz was forced to shut down his studio for the second time in 1949. The first time was very briefly in 1940 thanks to Burt Gillette, going over costs. Walter Lantz reopened his studio in 1950 and wisely decided to return to Universal and never move from there. Unfortunately, he also started paying less and less attention to detail. And although he had some very great films released even after the 40s, these are generally considered to be inferior. Lantz initially took up directing duties himself for this revival era, and he retooled Woody Woodpecker infamously from a heckler who was crazed into just a standard heroic everyman, voiced by his wife, Grace Stafford. The Woodpecker was even given a more cutesy redesign to match this change. In 1952, Lantz decided to once again stop directing, this time for good, and hand the duties over to Don Patterson. Patterson often made up for whatever flaws were in his films with striking visual contrast in the color composition department. And being the most fluid of Walter Lantz's animators during that period certainly helped his films at least appear higher quality. Now, Walter Lantz was eventually able to build enough money for his second unit, and he rotated through a bunch of people. First was Grant Simmons and Ray Patterson, two former MGM animators who left after 2 shorts to found their own production company. The second was Tex Avery. And his cartoons are widely considered to be very good, though they're not well known. But I'll get more to Walter Lantz afterwards later. Meanwhile, in third place, Sandy Claus, a Looney Tunes cartoon directed by Friz Freleng and starring Sylvester and Tweety, as well as Granny. One of the effects that the permanent shutdown had on the studio was that you saw credits in places that you saw the staff being credited in places where they usually would not be credited. This was no exception. Though Arthur Davis animated for Friz Freleng a lot and had many a directorial credit to his name, this is the only time in which he was actually credited for writing the story, because Warren Foster was unavailable. Friz Freleng's unit was uniquely kept intact compared to the other 2 units, just in case the shutdown wound up being quickly reversed, which it technically was. It was just half a year. So Manny Perez, whom Friz Freleng was famous for treating like crap, and Ken Champion wound up leaving his unit for good. But Virgil Ross stayed, as did Davis. Friz Freleng actually gained an animator back from the 40s in the form of Jerry Chinicke, who was widely considered to be his top animator. Also around this time, Friz Freleng began experimenting with UPA more than any other director in the Warner Brothers studio. His style was more conservative, and less prone to rubbery movement, but it was also more fluid and timed better. His less is more approach would eventually start grinding on his performance, however. This cartoon also marks the final time Bea Benaderet voiced Granny, as following the following cartoon, The Whole Idea by Baaaack Kimson, she would outright leave, and the role of the generic female voice was given to June Foray. Granny would also find herself being gradually redesigned after that appearance. But anyhow, to the short, it's just Sylvester trying to eat Tweety at the beach. It's a really good Sylvester and Tweety cartoon, but besides the cast changes and the significance of Bea Benaderet bowing out as Granny, there's nothing really significant about it. And yeah, I like the scene in which Tweety is surrounded by the sea. Yeah, Bugs, so are you. In fourth place, we have Pigs is Pigs, not to be confused with Fritz Freeling's 1937 short. A Walt Disney short that was directed by Jack Kidding, who later produced a lot of made-for-television Popeye cartoons that are not considered good in quality, which is a shame because his stuff for Disney was actually good. And remember when I said even Disney was starting to take cues from UPA? Well, I think that Pigs is Pigs actually takes more from UPA than Toot Whistle Plunk and Bloom. Toot Whistle Plunk and Boom. Because even by Disney standards, this is very minimalist. An Irish railroad worker gets a couple guinea pigs, and he is a stickler to the rules such that he outright refuses to sell them to an associate that wants them. And he pays the price when they wind up multiplying to the extremes, and the railroad company that he works for is slow to respond and does nothing. This was based on a short story of the same name in 1905. And what it lacks in animation, it makes up for in the story, which is what Disney is strong at, admittedly. Finally, in fifth place, we have Touche, Pussycat, a prequel to The Two Musketeers starring Tom and Jerry. And in their glorious CinemaScope style. Tom and Jerry and MGM started doing CinemaScope cartoons beginning with 1954's Pet Peeve. By 1955, MGM decided that every single one of their cartoons would be in CinemaScope. And it is also with this cartoon that we say goodbye to Tom and Jerry. Though they had several memorable more shorts afterwards, like Pecos Pets or Blue Cat Blues, none of them actually managed to get the Academy Awards. Tom, Jerry, and Nibbles would continue being Mouseketeers in two further shorts, Tom and Cherie and Royal Catnap. But that's 1954. Lots and lots of great shorts, and it's really, along with 1953, a transition from the Golden Age into the newer UPA style. And although they're making the best of it right now, that's not going to be true in the future. So anyhow, sorry for the long wait. I know, I need to be more consistent with my time. And I probably lost a bunch of viewers anyhow, watchers anyhow. Like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I'm the Man from Wackyland notifying you that was 1954.